This week in a conversation, I have the privilege to welcome back into the conversation my old friend EG Radcliff. This evening, we're going to be talking about new projects. We're going to be talking about, of course, her the many things that she's been writing on, but also I'll be looking for her personal intakes on the current trend right now within the fantasy world, which is dystopian fantasy. And of course, EG and I will be talking about my upcoming new novel, Bittersweet Memories of Last Spring. We're going to have a little chat about it. By the way, speaking on that note on Bittersweet, it's going to be, it's going to hit the markets in a couple of weeks. So I'm encouraging everyone just to take a look at it. And I'd like your opinion regarding the story. This is my first publication in 7 years. So just be on the lookout for it. And also, I have to say, I'm encouraging everyone just in every program is to let everyone know it's important to understand that the best way to support this channel is to subscribe to it. And if you think that these videos or this current one has been of some interest to you, you can let me know in the comment box at the bottom of the video. And also, if you subscribe to this channel, if you haven't done so, if you subscribe now, don't forget to click the notification bell so that way every time a video is posted, it's going to you as soon as possible. So let's get started. My name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here this evening with a very, an impeccable author. She was once my guest in the conversation. And I'm here with EG Radcliff. She's an impressive fantasy writer and also a good friend. Tonight, we're going to be talking about so many things that's going on within the fantasy world, in particular, the new trend right now, which is dystopian fantasy, and some of the other work that EG also has been working on. So, EG, welcome to the conversation again.
Thank you so much for having me again. It's great to be back.
So, since the last time with the trilogy, The Coming of Age, so where are we? Because I know we have the Wild Court, we have the Last Prince, and also the Hidden King. Mm-hmm. So where are we now in that series?
In terms of what I'm working on?
Yeah.
So after I finished the Wild Court, that was last year.
Okay.
Actually, I think we just hit the 1 year anniversary. I started working on a new project. Actually, I had started planning the new project while I was still writing the Wild Court. After finishing, then I got to start writing it instead of just being in the planning stages. So I've been working on that. It's been a lot of fun. It's a much larger scale, so it's a lot more work to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. But it's been a really good time so far.
Okay. Because I know one of the things you've known for your world building skills. A lot of people, hear talk about that. So I think that this is something to feel proud, right? So proud about it. Right?
I feel proud about it, especially when people bring it up to me, that it's something that caught their attention. That's always very gratifying. And sort of inspired by / that's just what I do. Inspired by that, I have really been putting effort into the world in the new series. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different political organizations, a lot of different geographical features. I know the names of some very small towns that are never going to make it into the narrative. Yeah. So there's languages and magic systems. It's a lot, but I think it's going to come together very nicely.
I was talking to an author last week and who told me that world building and as a fantasy writer proves to be the most important skill to master. Is he correct?
It's, if not the most important, at least very important, because without a world to to play in. You don't have that sort of the richness that makes the fantasy believable. If you have a book set in reality, you know, the real world, the world building is done for you. But when you have fantasy and you're completely starting with a blank slate, you still want to be able to draw on that complexity because it gives so much life to the story. So when you read a really good fantasy novel, you feel like you could be there. That's the world building.
And you know why? Escaping to a fantasy world seems to be also one of the most important things that a reader could do.
Mm-hmm.
I remember last time we talked, and I told you, because of you and some of the other fantasy writers that I have been interacting with, I began to really take a closer look at fantasy writing. And I have been falling in love with it ever since too. But now, EG, they're talking about a dystopian fantasy, which is, it seems to me, it's the new trend out there. Why is so now?
I think there's a few different reasons for it. Now, these are just my personal theories combined with a few things I've heard others say, but a lot of fantasy is it's escapism, and that is not a bad thing. It's the act of, you know, putting yourself into a completely different experience and letting yourself live that. It's different from your life, and that can feel really good. But sometimes it can be cathartic to jump into a world where everything's worse instead. Because when you jump out of a really nice world, it can be kind of disappointing. Like, dang, I wish I was still in Narnia. But when you jump out of a nasty world, it feels much better because it's a relief. So I think that sometimes, especially when the world is a bit of a mess, I mean, you can name any number of things going on, a global pandemic, not least among them, people are seeking catharsis. And that's why dark fantasy, I think, is also popular. Dark and dystopian is really coming up. The other thing too is it just, you know, there's the coming back from it that feels good, but there's also when you're in it, a lot of the times there's anger in those stories, and that anger can feel kind of good to experience, to let out in a very controlled novel environment.
And you know what? I think that when I was a kid, I was fascinated with dystopian stories, as if to say that, you know, I was afraid of werewolves, you know, you know, but it was kind of a boy I was. But let me ask you something, EG. Now, is there really, do you think, because I know that a few years ago, to such a euphoria surrounding it's called dark fantasy. But now, as you say, it continues to be relevant. But you don't write these types of fantasy stories. Why you choose to, I'm not saying to ignore it, but to choose a different path when it comes to writing, to your writing in particular?
I think some of it's just a matter of taste. I have never loved stories that feel hopeless, and there are plenty of dystopian fantasies out there that do not feel hopeless, where the whole idea is to fix the broken world, and I do like those. But in terms of like particularly dark stories, it's just never been my taste. When I'm experiencing a lot of emotion in my own life, or I'm working through, you know, my own issues, I prefer to be able to escape to a happier place instead of a cathartic place, I guess. But that's just me. And, you know, I still have to confess that in the darker scenes in my novels, I do still kind of indulge in that catharsis.
Okay. And you know what? You're not alone on this one. Lisa Dale told me that too, not too long ago. So, but let me ask you something. Also, last time we talked, you said besides fantasy, there's another genre that you would be interested in writing. You said, if I remember correctly, it was historical novel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have in mind something, or are you cooking something for us, or not
Yeah.
yet?
Well, okay, so yes, but also not yet. I'm gonna do the upcoming series first, and that's gonna be fantasy with historical inspiration. It's going to be kind of a mishmash of different eras, but primarily like the late 1800s. But it's a big continent, so it's going to be across the globe kind of. I'm pulling inspiration because there's all sorts of different stages of development and industry and everything that happened in that one era. So anyways, inspired by, not actually historical, but after that I have been planning a story that centers in the Reformation in England. So in a small English town right immediately after the onset of the Protestant Reformation. So it's going to center on a small priest in a small town, kind of working through that transition away from Catholicism. But there's also going to be drama. It's not going to be dull, I promise.
Okay, because I know there has to be some drama. I know
Oh, it'll be very dramatic, and there will be romance.
Yeah.
It'll be great.
Okay. Now, I remember at the beginning you just mentioned and what you're currently working on right now. There are a lot of things going on inside the story, including political events. Can you give us a sneak preview of what these are?
Sure, just a really high level. It's a kind of clash of empires situation, but we're going to get an into both of the primary political powers, one of which has subjugated the other.
Okay.
It's the sort of situation where they were both trying to subjugate an entire area, but one of them engulfed the other instead. But that happened all in the past, so now we're dealing with political fallout 300 years later. But we're going to have perspectives from insiders of both primary movers. So I'm hoping to be able to kind of play with the complexities a little bit. It's not going to be terribly straightforward. Nothing is going to be black and white. It's going to be a disaster. I'm very excited. So yeah, there's also going to be some war elements.
So is it fair to say, because we know that fiction reflects reality, so is it fair to say, EG, you draw from geopolitical events going on right now in this world? It's true.
I would say I'm not drawing from any specific historical events. It's more that I've studied a number of them, a large number of them, and I'm sort of analyzing the way certain patterns tend to play out. And then those patterns find representation.
So I just mentioned geopolitical issues, because is it one group seem to swallow the other, so it's just taking over the other one? So there might also be some geopolitical reality, because it's two worlds we talk about. Did you draw from today's reality to build these two worlds?
Yes and no. Yes, in that there's only so much that I can make up from my own mind in terms of things that I don't have direct experience with. If I could cook up an entire, political scheme and all that in a vacuum, that'd be cool, but I can't. And so everything is based on something that's happened. Even if I pulled a bit from this event and a bit from that event and just kind of tried to see what would happen given the cultures that are also inspired by different regions. Yes, but I also did try very hard not to make it a direct parallel to anything that is happening today or that I know of. So yeah.
Now let's switch the subject for a minute right now. I saw that you continue to be relevant on social media, and not just on Twitter. You are on Goodreads, you are on Instagram, on Facebook. And then I realized that your followers, they really do follow you. So how did you writing, you on the social media, you seem to be pretty proactive doing that. How do you keep a balance between writing, working, and also managing your social media platforms?
I gotta say, I don't balance anything very well. I sacrifice a lot of sleep. Because I work full time. I also write. I also do everything on top of that. I don't really know how to stay still. So if I have a few minutes of free time, I'm logging on or, at least thinking about what I would say in a future interaction. I do, one of the main tenets of any social media platform with my name on it is that I'm going to try and interact with kindness.
Mhm.
I'm not going to tolerate, hatefulness, which I haven't gotten any, fortunately, but I'm going to interact with everybody nicely. And I think that appeals to people. I try to act with people through a screen as I would act with them in real life. How about that?
That's a good, I would say, skills to have,
Mhm.
No, I don't interact with others, even if we have to do it through, a platform, social media.
Mhm.
But EG, now we know that you're working in a new project, and also that I have something that I have been cooking for the longest now.
Yes, you have been, and I want to hear about it.
You know what? It's a novel. I would say it's an immigrant story. It's a story about a young man, 17-year-old, who was put on a boat to come to the United States, and he was alone. So the story unfolds from there, and then I followed this young man from the belly of that boat to Miami, and then throughout his entire, young life, where he went to college and became, he graduated he became a software engineer. And, so this is a young man who went through a lot. Maybe you've never experienced something like, but I have. So to be transplanted into a new land where you don't know people, you don't know the language, you don't know the culture, and you have to work to assimilate. But it's not just a question of immersion or assimilation or culturation, but it is also a question of survival, of and the pursuit of the elusive American dream. So this is the story of this young man that I was inspired to write the story. But I also have to say, this story also, I was encouraged to write a story like this by my own children, because they wanted to know how really life was back in the 1980s when I was a young man, when I came to the United States. So this is the story. It's titled Bittersweet Memories of Last Spring. At the spring of your life, many things or anything can happen. So he navigates himself through the unforgiving streets sometimes of Miami, and to create a little spot, a niche for himself.
That sounds fascinating. And, one of the things, I'm not an immigrant, my family has not been immigrants in generations, but one of the things that's always fascinated me is how you can find your place in a new culture, but also hold on to your roots and your own culture and where you came from, which I imagine you probably explore in this, right?
Exactly. A lot, I would say. And this story, the character himself explains that. He said that he was, to some extent, lucky than many other refugees because of the fact that he lived within the perimeter of the Haitian community down in South Florida. So he was able to preserve his language, his culture, because the closest you could get to Port-au-Prince was Little Haiti down in Miami. So he was there, but he did not confine himself within the Haitian community. He never wanted to live in the fringe of society. He wanted to be an American, but also a productive one. So he really treasured education. So, he sacrificed, he made a lot of sacrifices to go to college, and he succeeded at doing that. So this is a story that I think that, readers will have to judge, and I'd
Well,
be delighted
but
to know what they say.
I'm very excited to read it myself. When it is available, where will people be able to buy it?
It's going to be in the next couple of weeks. It should be everywhere. It's of course, the number one spot, which is Amazon, but it's going to be Barnes and Nobles. It's going to be throughout the all the outlets where they sell books. Basically, if you're in Canada, you can have it too. In Europe, you can have it. So hopefully, I'm sure you'll be able to read it, and many of my friends also will read it. And then, if you have a heart, you probably feel for this young man, and of course, since every young person in their life, at some point, they fall in love, so he also happens to fall in love with a girl. So this is the story. So
I am very excited to see it. And congratulations for finishing a whole project. Like, that is such a good feeling. I love that feeling. When it first hits the market and you're like, it's out.
Yeah, it's a feeling, Reminds me back 7 years ago when I published Midnight at Women.
Yeah.
And it's been 7 years already. So
you never
but
forget
this
that
one is
either.
a sequel. The book 1 is in a couple of weeks, and book 2 I intend to release the second part of the story in December, if all goes well. So
Excellent. Well, then I'll look forward to both.
Okay.
It'll be a little Christmas present for me.
Oh, that'll be nice. And also, EG, so now a new project that you're currently working on. So new project besides the one that we talked at the beginning of this conversation. Any other thing that you want to share with the reader, with the viewers?
Oh, I'm working on a million projects. Not all of them are writing. I'm actually doing an illustration set for the upcoming series. I'm jumping the gun on that one, to be honest, but it's happening. I like being able to see what my characters look like get them out of my head. And I've been working very hard on my art abilities to be able to get to that point. And I think I'm finally reaching a point where when I draw them, they look like how I imagine them, which has been very, very fun. Also very time consuming, but very fun. I think that just about everything, I don't know. You're an author. You get it when you have an idea.
Let me ask you a question. Here, listen. Illustration requires a specific skill. Now, did you go to school to learn how to do that too, besides, writing?
I did not, actually. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to get a job, after, but it had always kind of been in my mind that it was something I really liked doing. So no, I'm primarily self-taught. If you've been following me on social media for long enough, you've seen some truly terrible things that I posted years ago. I've since taken them down out of shame. But, it's the sort of thing that you're constantly improving on. So you should be able to look back at old work and be like, oh, I'm so much better now. We don't have to think about that. That's a good thing. But no, I have not gone to school for it. I have just learned from other people who have been willing to help me out.
And another thing I'd like to ask you, if you think it's a plus when you have these two skills as a writer, you intellectually can create a masterpiece, and also in the graphic side, you can also be as impressive as the writing itself. So how do you feel when you have both under your wings?
Quite lucky, actually. I think, just lucky. I mean, lucky that my parents were supportive of both passions when I was growing up. Lucky that I have the means to, buy art supplies or whatever. Lucky that I have the time at like 4 a.m. to indulge trying a new strategy or technique. But I gotta say, it's absolutely wonderful to be able to think of something and then draw it, because I'm a very visual writer and a very visual reader. I've heard of people experiencing different things with this, where some people can get a picture in their head and some people don't. They just sort of like know what's happening. Very interesting to me. Don't know how that works, but I am a very visual reader. So I have an entire movie screen in my head while I'm reading and writing. And to be able to kind of capture a frame of that, it makes it easy to think.
And you know what, EG, one thing I really like about your writing is just the fact that you put the reader in the position where he or she can feel is right there with the character. That's what I like. You're not the only one, but this is what I look for when I write. When I pick up a piece of art and I start reading it, and I can see it I remember the passage from Wild Court that I had you read for me during the last conversation. I was very fascinated about this passage. And I remember you promised. You said, you didn't make a full promise. You said once the series ended, you probably will have to have another one, the fourth one, but no promising. You say, I have you. Well, I'm quoting you now. Ever since then, EG, have you thinking of going back to the story?
There are definitely things that pop into my head. I'm like, oh, that could be something. But in terms of continuing the story of the coming of age and working more in that series, I think I'm not going to. I think I'm going to put it down and move on and let it be what it is. I'm proud of it. It also highlights, kind of illustrates a lot of my development as a writer. And I think I'm just going to leave it be. I think I'm just going to take all the skills that I got from that and put them towards other things. But I will definitely be going back and adding a drawing or two, posting on social media. Maybe I'll even do little subscriber bonuses, like short stories set in that world, stuff like that, whenever I have the time. But yeah.
On Wild Court, you told me there's some of the characters that you really like a lot. And those characters sometimes speak to you.
Yeah, and then you feel sad when you finish it. I miss you.
And you know what, EG, we could talk forever, and one last question I want to ask you. How do you see marketing right now? Just when we thought we were leaving COVID behind us, but they're still coming, talking about news train and all that. And it's very difficult as a writer to be out there on the road promoting your book. So how do you see this right now?
Marketing there have been a couple decisions that I've had to make regarding marketing, especially since now I have finished a series, so I'm not promoting the release of new books.
Yeah.
I have kind of slowed it down a bit, so I still promote it on my social media. I still talk to people. I still try to connect with organizations that, can promote it independently. But I don't run as many ads anymore. I don't spend a ton of money on promotion or marketing. And so that has kind of coincided with the pandemic restrictions lifting a little bit. So it's hard to tell what causes have influenced which trends, because they've just kind of been happening at once. But people did read a lot when they were stuck in quarantine, which was good for us, as authors.
But now you're just getting out of the house, now going back to work. You can see the slowdown on the reading level.
A bit, yeah. Well, it's also interesting too, because currently I have audiobooks in the works, which hopefully will be appealing to people like on a commute or if they are in the middle of doing something. So I'm hoping that that boosts a bit of engagement.
Mm. And you know what? The one question I was going to forget, to ask you is this specific question. How do you manage to submit your literary works for literary competition? Have you been doing that? And if you have, then how? Maybe that could be a lesson to writers out there.
I have submitted books to little competitions. Well, I say little, it's pretty big, but like Spiffbo, which is an indie book competition. Yeah. And so that kind of thing is great because it generates a lot of attention since it's a fairly large scale competition. So you get attention from other authors, you get attention from readers who are following it. But that's, I think, probably like the big competition I entered. Other than that, sometimes I apply for reviews or rewards. But yeah, you know what? To any aspiring authors out there, apply to the competitions. They're a lot of fun. They're never going to hurt your name, and you can get a lot of great attention.
Okay, so with that, I'm just going to say once more, and it's always a pleasure to have my old friend, EG Radcliff, into the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.